Rabbi Green and the Academy, Daniel Lefton, for allowing me to use the Academy as to give the this Hazkara for my father. You know, my father was very dedicated to the Academy, and it's fitting that I would have it here. I mean, this was the institution that he was most associated with. He was the president of Young Israel also, but the Academy was really where his heart and soul was. I want to thank, there are a few people I want to thank before I begin. I want to thank Lila Beal for taping this, and I very much appreciate it. And I wanted to thank Lenny Cohn and his daughter. They prepared all the desserts and everything, and people should take, take whatever they would like. I'm just going to speak before I show you this video. I found this video. My kids wanted me to convert VHS tapes to DVDs. So I started looking through a couple of the tapes, and besides the depression that you go into immediately watching these tapes. But I found this tape of the dinner that they honored my dad. It's 25 years ago, when Rabbi Rishel was still here. Mark Drazen was actually, I think, the president at that time. And I thought this would be interesting. I mean, it's 25 years ago when he spoke about the Academy, to see, a little bit about the changes and just the type of people that were involved, the old-timers, so to speak. Most people don't know too much about the history of a lot of the elderly people that are gone now, that, and I'm sure that my dad's story is a microcosm of what happened to many people when they came to America. My dad was born in 1917 in Russia, and his father was I wouldn't know if he was a successful merchant. He had a wagon that somebody drove for him, so I guess he was somewhat successful that he had a driver. And what happened was that he was worried that he was going to be conscripted in the army, so what he did was he hid out, and hiding out, he hid in caves. Matter of fact, one of the places he hid out was at the Weintraub family, which would later would be my mother's family, because my dad's uncle was married to my grandmother's sister, my grandmother Weintraub's sister, and another sister of my dad's, his aunt was married to an uncle of theirs. So the families were very much interrelated. Growing up, I had cousins in the city that were cousins on both sides. We had like 42 families in Iowa, and we related to about 38, and there were about 50 feuds going on all the time. The wives also feuded, that's why there was more than, but my dad's father ended up getting pneumonia, hiding out in these caves and wherever he could hide out, and when my dad was 7, his father died. Now his brother lived in a small town called Marshalltown, Iowa. Now, Marshalltown is kind of like Atomo, Iowa without the glitz. I mean, it was like tiny little hamlet. There were, pretty much a farm city. And their relatives, all of the relatives that were there, the majority of them were in the scrap iron business. They were all competitors, and they were all in this little town. The reason they got to Marshalltown is because the uncle was supposed to go to Mason City, and he couldn't read English, and the train stopped, and he saw M.A. for Marshalltown. He thought it was Mason City. He got off the train, and that's the story. That's how they ended up in Marshalltown. So his mother, my dad's mother, had come from a somewhat well-to-do family. They had some sort of fishing license for I think it was the Black Sea or wherever in Russia near Odessa, and people had to pay them to fish. So they were okay. They did okay. And now, though, that her husband passed away, so they were planning on going to America. My dad's uncle didn't know that his brother died, so he sent the tickets. Now, they would have never gotten out of Russia because the father wasn't there. So the Balagala, the guy who drove the wagon, he paraded and masqueraded as the father so they could get on the boat. And my dad said later this guy became a multimillionaire. I mean, he settled somewhere else in Iowa and became a multimillionaire. But they got to Marshalltown, and the thing is, my Zeta Weintraub also, because it was his brother-in-law also, went to Marshalltown. The difference is that my Zeta left. I'm not sure if the same day he got there he left, or he waited overnight till the next train came. But he was out of there. He said he couldn't live in such a city. But my grandmother had no money, and she came. And my dad's uncle was, very generous. He put him up in a shack on the junkyard. I mean, they basically lived in this shack. He also raised sheep. The sheep were running around there also. He made money from the wool. You know, my dad, when he later lived in in Nevada, which I'll get to in a second, he had a horse. I said, it's lucky it wasn't in Marshalltown. The uncle would have made a glue factory out of it. Because whatever he could get something from, I mean, that's how the business worked. So what happened was the uncle really did not want the responsibility of his sister-in-law. So he found somebody in a smaller town, even than Marshalltown, called Nevada, Iowa. Now, it's written like Nevada, but in Iowa they pronounce it Nevada. They're worried you might make a mistake, you know, and think you're, not that you could make a mistake, but anyway, they moved there. They were the only Jews in the city. Now, the only thing going for this guy was they claimed that he saved the whole city. He had a grocery store. They claimed he saved the entire city from famine during World War II. Of course, when you find out that the city consisted of 25 people, it's not such a great. But and you know, he was generous. He would give us candy from the store, and he only charged us wholesale. So you know, I had no problems. But the truth is, he wasn't the greatest stepfather. He had no learning background. My grandmother, who had been religious, he had his store. He wanted her to work on Shabbos. I mean, there were a lot of problems. What my grandmother did was that my dad went to high school. He was I think the only Jewish student there. And she sent him to Marshalltown. He would make frequent trips because his grandfather was still alive. And his grandfather supposedly spent the day with a cousin in the back room of his store learning Kabbalah all day. And he had a long beard. They said the people in the city called him Santa Claus because they'd never seen, you know. And my dad went to Marshalltown, and his grandfather basically taught him, you know, to read Hebrew, to daven, to put on tefillin. But that was the extent of my dad's Jewish education. My dad never went to yeshiva. And when my dad left Nevada at 18 after he graduated high school, so he moved to Marshalltown, and he began working. And from 18 till he was 80, I don't think he'd never stopped working for the rest of his life. So my dad never really had a chance to get a Jewish education. But my dad was very enamored with, he loved Rabbanim, he loved everything that had to do with Yiddishkeit. Even in Marshalltown, we had one shul which his uncle, of course, ran. And the uncle was a Balkori, the Chaz, and his uncle obviously had some training. Probably had gone to yeshiva in Europe. And basically, that was the only education that my dad had. So when they moved to St. Louis, my dad was very happy because this was the first time that he was really exposed to a large Jewish community. And my mother, of course, my mother had grown up in St. Louis, and my mother pushed my dad to do all kinds of work for the community, and my dad really fell in love with the Jewish community and with helping out. But one of the things that when he was asked to, well, I'll end with this and then show the movie, when he was asked to become president of the Academy, he said, what do I know from being a president of the Academy? I said, well, you know, look at your experience in Iowa. My dad had in his business, there was a reservation of Indians called the Tama Indians. Nobody would do business with them. They didn't trust them. My dad not only did business with them, but my dad actually, when the chief's son became drafted into the Army, my dad went to the draft board and he pleaded, he said they need him on the reservation, and he got the boy out of the Army. So the chief made my dad an honorary chief of the Tama Indians. This is true. And we'd have to go once a year. They had some kind of powwow we had to go to. So when it came time for my dad to, you know, take over the Academy, I said, look, if you could handle the Tama Indians, don't you think that the Academy Board would really prove to be... And I said, Dad, how come you were so nice to the Indians? And he told me something, and he'd be rich today if he, you know, coined the phrase. He said, don't you know, Indian lives matter. And I'll tell you, I see that phrase, I was in Borough Park, I saw a sign that said Gentile. And I was in, I think it was in Williamsburg, it said Belzer Lives Matter. Everybody, it seems like, is picking up on that phrase. But anyway, I'm going to show you if we get it to work, I'm going to show you, it's about a 10-minute video of a dinner from I'm trying to think of, I think it was 1990. And, does that make sense? Yeah, around, I think it was 1990. And let me just get it started. And then let's